Thank you all for coming for this third in our five-part Innovators Symposium series. This will be a terrific night tonight, and I think you're here tonight because you share our perspective that information technology is transforming healthcare in virtually every way imaginable. You might even say, for those of us who are employed by the system or the hospitals, we work for IT companies that are increasingly delivering healthcare. Tonight we have two panels which will feature the strategic and the specific. Our first will consist of leaders who are guiding and shaping IT at the top level in terms of managing large teams and deciding what are the priorities for the organization. I think, at least in my time here, maybe the first that they've spoken collectively about their vision of where IT is going. They'll be followed by a second panel, individuals who are themselves using their creativity and insights to create products that will bring new benefits to patients in many different ways. So I'm delighted to introduce my colleague who will moderate our first panel, the strategic one. And you know, like Sting, Bono, Bruce, and LeBron, he is singular in his chosen profession, and that being academic business development, and he only needs to go by that one name, Trung.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thanks for making the time here, and thanks for the Brigham for hosting us. Before we get started, let me introduce our guest panelists. To my right, I have Dr. Henry Chue, the Chief of the Division of Biomedical Informatics at Mass General Hospital. To his right, Dr. Adam Landman, the Vice President and Chief Information Officer here at Brigham Health, and Jim Noga, the Vice President and Chief Information Officer at Partners Healthcare. So you've got a Buckeye down here. You got Carnegie Mellon represented, and you got Harvard True and True over here. So you got a good representation of all the education. So it is a myth that all the folks at Partners are all Harvard guys and gals. So anyways, very good representation. Before we kick it off, tonight we have 45 minutes, and we want to cover really three major topic areas. I'm going to use the word HIT, digital health, interchangeably. It really, I think, means similar. But when we get into it, certainly we're going to level set and get a definition of what it means, because it means a lot of different things to different folks. And then, you know, covering the topic certainly of importance for a lot of folks here who are working as clinicians and folks touching ECare and Epic. We'll certainly touch the topic of how it certainly impacts the work that we all do, but mostly as it relates to innovation and patient care. And then lastly, we'll cover the topic that a lot of the entrepreneurs and innovators quite frankly care about, which is how do we just innovate? And regardless of how it touches Epic or ECare, but certainly how do we certainly solve solutions and pain points that matters to our patients and our clinicians. And we'll certainly cover that topic broadly, all right? Once again, just to set context before I get into asking the questions, you know, digital health is a really interesting space. Since 2014, over 800 companies have been invested in by venture capitalists to the tune of about $16 billion. This year alone, in 2017, that investment is ramping significantly. Over the last couple of years, it's been around $4 to $5 billion from the venture community this year. As forecasted by Accenture, I think we're going to end the calendar year 2017 at about $7 billion. The interesting thing is there's a lot of interest and money going into the space, but at the same time, you know, you have to sift through and figure out what's fiction and what's reality, right? And at the end of the day, for us, the observations that I've had in this space and working in it for a while is this. You know, a lot of the investments in healthcare IT is sort of ill-equipped. It's not really designed for the enterprise and for the system. There's a lot of point solutions that are interesting, but it doesn't scale. And certainly organizations like ours that touches a lot of patients, touches a lot of clinicians, the ability to scale and to the ability to have an enterprise capability is really important. The other thing that you see in this space is, you know, there's a lot of better mousetraps, right? A lot of very cool things that are interesting at the surface, but when you peel it back, it's not very transformative. I mean, healthcare transformation requires a significant amount of innovation and a lot of scaling around that. So at least for the path forward, some of the main observations that we've seen, at least in innovation and looking at advancing healthcare IT, is really how do you position sort of the ability to work with vendors and even entrepreneurs within our own system to make sure that we're able to think about the enterprise, think about scalability, interoperability, and then finally, at the end of the day, be a great partner to all of you out there as well as to our industry collaborators. And I think we're really well positioned to do that as an organization. And you'll hear that certainly from our leaders here across the system. And folks certainly have different viewpoints on how to get there, but I think the outcome is always the same, which is to certainly fulfill our mission around patient care, around teaching and training, and around research. And I think healthcare IT, as we look at the future of what it can do, there's great promise and certainly possibilities to do it in a way that really will be transformative for our organization, okay? So with that, let me start off by asking Jim maybe to kick off the panel discussion and just get your thoughts in general, Jim, with respect to the organizations and partners' mission around healthcare IT, and maybe give us an overview of the long history and the wonderful heritage around innovation here.
Sure, and quickly reflecting, and I think you all are aware of the mission, I think, of partners, of the Brigham, of the General, of really the patient care, teaching, discovery, and serving the community. And I think in all aspects, healthcare IT plays a role. Sometimes in digital health, people immediately think of patient engagement and patient empowerment, but it goes well beyond that. And before I talk about today's examples, I mean, really reflecting on our heritage, if we go back to the 70s, the MUMPS, which came out of Mass General, and CoStar, which was really the first ambulatory record. And in fact, when I look at records today, there's still many aspects that pulled forward into the ambulatory records that are sold today. At the Brigham Women's Hospital, really with order entry, that was a real breakthrough in terms of reducing medication errors. We had the first independent clinical data repository. The longitudinal medical record actually was one of the first web-based ambulatory records and was fully deployed across partners. So we have a heritage and a history of innovation. And I've talked about the fact that Epic, I mean, we needed to do it. It was a grind, and now it's time to get back to being innovative. It was sort of blocking and tackling for the past 4 to 5 years, and I think there's many opportunities. And again, it's beyond patient engagement. It is about artificial intelligence and machine learning. It is about things like wayfinding in a hospital. So there's many opportunities, niche opportunities and large opportunities, and then the opportunity, obviously, to monetize that and commercialize it. I think of recently Gene Insight that was acquired by Sunquest was developed at Partners. So many opportunities, a long heritage, and really look forward to really getting back and energizing innovation in the healthcare IT space.
Great, thanks, Jim. And Adam, maybe you can expand on that a little bit. Obviously, there's a long history here at the Brigham, and maybe as Jim has already sort of covered a little bit of the ground, which is sort of defining digital healthcare IT. What does that mean to you in the organization?
Thanks. Thanks for the opportunity. And I completely agree with Jim's comments and might expand them. When I think about health IT, what we're really looking for are solutions that address the quadruple aim. And from you're all familiar with the triple aim from the Institute for Healthcare Improvement to, we're seeking solutions that improve overall health, that improve quality and safety, and that reduce costs. But importantly, Christine Sinsky recently added a fourth aim, and that's to improve the clinician experience. We know, unfortunately, that many of the digital interventions we've had have actually increased administrative burden or certainly brought them to the forefront. And so we're really looking for solutions that address all four. And as Jim said, we have a very rich heritage here at the Brigham. Jim mentioned the groundbreaking work on computerized provider order entry and clinical decision support. And David Bates and his research group did the landmark research studies that showed that CPOE combined with clinical decision support reduces adverse medication events and can reduce mortality as well. I just want to add a couple more examples that continued this tradition at the Brigham of using health IT to improve quality, safety, and efficiency. Dr. Ramin Khorsani from radiology has been innovating in the clinical decision support space, using digital clinical decision support to improve the appropriateness of imaging use. And has shown improved adherence to recommended imaging modalities or evidence-based imaging, and has also shown reduced cost by doing that. And then the final example I'll just highlight is the Brigham also pioneered the use of barcode-based medication administration. We built, with the Partners IS team, built our own system here, and then Dr. Eric Poon did an evaluation study which was published in the New England Journal on the impact of adding barcode-based medication administration further reduced medication errors, and that formed the basis of incorporating that requirement into meaningful use. So as Jim said, there's a rich heritage. I know Henry's going to share the rich heritage at MGH, and it's really exciting to be here talking about this today, about how we're going to continue to lead the nation and the world in health IT and digital health.
Well, Henry, why don't you share the MGH's history?
Sure. Okay. So yeah, it's been a long haul. You guys may know Octo Barnett, who started the Lab of Computer Science at the Mass General over 50 years ago now, and you may not know that he actually was doing research in cardiovascular medicine here at the Brigham when he was recruited over to the Mass General to start the informatics lab there. So he was actually, we have pictures of him working in the dog lab over at the Brigham prior to him starting the lab at Mass General. So as Jim pointed out, one of the early successes of the lab was creating this platform called MUMPS, which today is known as Cache, and ironically is the underpinning of Epic, right? So Epic runs on Cache, which was basically a private company's version of MUMPS, which was put out in the public domain. Chris, I'm sure you're sorry to hear that that was the case, but was put out in the public domain and then translated from there. So that's been a big success both in the healthcare arena as well as the finance arena of all places. Another big success that Jim mentioned was putting out web-based electronic records. I remember when Partners was being formed and we were talking about how do we move ambulatory records to the next stage, and we took upon ourselves to say, you know what, we should just build this thing completely browser-based. This is when Netscape was the only browser and people were looking at it, the gray screens and that kind of thing. And, we've come a long way. And, but that early innovation is what ended up feeding a lot of the later applications we have today. Another arena is research. As people have pointed out, at the Mass General, we created the Research Patient Data Registry. It was initially a very, very small project within the context of the clinical research program run by Bill Crowley, but now it's grown up into a very large partners-based mega terabyte repository, and through some very amazing work by Sean Murphy and others in the grant world, it's really an open source example through a project called I2B2, where many academic centers around the world have actually adopted that model for managing research and clinical information. So there's a lot of innovation that's come out of Mass General and the Brigham to date, but what we're really looking forward to is how do we set the stage for the next level? Because one of the things I would say provocatively is that if we're calling it digital health, then we failed, right? Because in truth, what we want the digital, we want the IT transformation to be invisible inside healthcare. We want it to be seamless, right? We don't really call it digital banking, do we? Or it's basically banking. And if you ask your kids, they don't even think of their iPads and their phones as computers anymore, right? They're just solutions for what they want to do. So I think that's where we want to head. Is we want to think about these innovations as solutions for where we can transform healthcare. The IT aspect of it is critical because that's the tactical way we get there, and we're really looking forward to promoting that over the next 2 decades.
That's great perspective, Henry. Thanks. Let me first, I should have said this at the beginning. We want to keep this discussion pretty dynamic. So please, if you have questions, raise your hand. We'll certainly take them with some ad hoc here, okay? The interesting thing is, this conversation is really around commercialization of IT and certainly innovation. And the interesting discussion that we just had here was, and I just learned this, I didn't know this, and part of our innovation back in the 70s with mums, and certainly releasing that out to the public, which was always a good thing to do. But in the context of today's world and looking back, someone else is taking sort of that innovation and create a set of commercial services around that. And ironically, through our investment in Epic, we also have to make an investment in a company called Intrasystem, who has really taken mums, and we write a nice healthy check to them each year. And the ironic thing is we actually created that. So at least in our office, in the innovation office, I'm working certainly with Adam and Henry and Jim and many of you guys. I think when we do look at the perspective of how to commercialize things, the view is not how does partners in the organization make a lot of money. But I think the viewpoint is, that's great and fine and well, but I think our ability to shape the solution for our own needs, but at the same time in doing that and hopefully working with companies to do that, we would like to believe that they're not going to turn around and treat us as a customer and charge us as well. So just a viewpoint for certainly the entrepreneurs out there who are interacting with our office. That's something to think about. All right. As we move forward here in terms of thinking about not digital health, but just healthcare in general here, Henry, we've made a huge investment in Epic through ECare, about 1 billion. I'll let Jim sort of round out that last number. It changes on a daily basis. But nevertheless, it is our mechanism and our delivery platform for getting information out to clinicians and patients in the context of care here. And for me, at least, healthcare has always been an information business. So as we think about investment in ECare, it is an information business, right, Jim? And the question is sort of how do the entrepreneurs and innovators out there, how should they view ECare and how should they interact with it as it relates to innovations?
So I think if you think about Epic, it's sort of a core foundational system, very transaction-based. So it's the blocking and tackling component. It really isn't the innovation component. In fact, some people have said, well, why didn't we just build it? And the truth is, with regulations and that, it was actually easier to go out and select a vendor to do it. And when we selected Epic, oddly enough, despite what you read in the press, is they have a lot of open APIs. We've built an interstitial layer, so to speak, that really allows innovators to connect to Epic without the threat of their IP being tainted, and really allows us to do things on an accelerated basis. That also with the introduction, and Adam can probably talk more about FHIR and SMART standards that are also accelerating the ability to innovate. I think something Trung said is really important. We want to commercialize innovation, but you have to make it work, and it really has to advance the practice of medicine. And the reason people have such an interest in partners is because of the two AMCs, and they know if it works here and at scale, it's going to work in other healthcare environments. So that's what makes partners very attractive to investors.
Thanks, Jim. Adam, just expanding on that as well, from the viewpoint of a hospital CIO, how do you view ECare as it relates to advancing your initiatives, and certainly how does the organization dock into the broader sort of system?
So I think we agree with Jim's comments that ECare is our foundation, and I would actually argue that ECare Epic is really a platform and actually can be extremely customized. Almost every detail of Epic can be customized. So we actually have the opportunity to do some innovation within Epic, and we are increasingly training clinicians as builders within Epic, so they can go through training, get certified, and those clinicians can build things in Epic, reports, smart phrases, smart links. So that's one form of innovation. I think the challenge is we just want to be a little bit careful governance-wise we are trying to maintain one instance of Epic across the enterprise with some standardization and helping ensure we're using evidence-based care practices across the entire system. But I do want to just make the point that Epic itself is extensible. And then completely agree that when Epic is not an ideal solution, we should always look at Epic first. But when it's not an ideal solution for a particular challenge, then we absolutely want to look towards extensions, and we want to look at what is actually out on the market that may exist, that may solve our needs, and we may just be able to purchase. And if we can't purchase it, and there's nothing on the market, we may need to build things ourselves. And then there's a third scenario that Trung was describing where we might partner with a vendor that has some type of solution, but not exactly what we need, and co-develop that solution with them to get it to meet our needs.
Thanks, Adam. Henry, through the Laboratory of Computer Science and a lot of the work that you've done over the years, as you see sort of Epic as the platform internally, how do you view your work and your interactions within the ECare ecosystem now?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think that what's interesting is pre-ECare and pre-Epic, with Partners IS, we really had a framework and a model for innovating on top of the Partners platform, right? So for many years, Partners had a set of open services to get in and out of enterprise databases. And in some ways, what Epic has done is just, if you will, taken a single vendor, consistent approach to that kind of platform. And so we're excited about the fact that we can have something that's reliable and have someone else take care of that to some degree, the vendor. But I think the challenge is going to be that these interfaces to get in and out of Epic, right now they're limited to what Epic has provided. But as Jim said, I think it's up to us to take advantage of that and to extend those because we have the ability to extend them. I think what's exciting is that our contract with Epic, if I read it correctly, is that we have the ability to create new interfaces in and out of Epic. So we're not, depending only on them, which is an important thing. So that would really let us develop internally really interesting solutions. And so I totally agree that, if there's something in Epic that does a good job, then we shouldn't replace it with something else built. And if there's something that a vendor has already that solves a solution, solves a problem, we should use that. But I think there are many times, and with many of the innovators here, I'm sure you have an idea that isn't really well represented either in any vendor solution. And I would definitely encourage you to push that forward because there are ways to create new solutions that aren't tied into Epic tightly, but that can interoperate with Epic cleanly. And if there are special services that you need to get in and out of those systems, there are ways to make those happen. I know that there are some, as we're getting Epic on board right now, there are some bandwidth issues in terms of being able to meet the demand of what everybody needs from Epic, but I think that'll get better as the years go on. So, I'd really encourage everybody to really think about how you can do innovation independently, but using and leveraging our investment in ECare.
Great. Let me take a pause here before we go into the next discussion. Any questions from the audience?
Jim Phillip, when we look at evidence-based medicine, often the evidence changes quickly, and it seems the information system never keeps up, and in fact points us in the wrong directions. Is there anything we can do about that today, or will we have to solve that?
So it's an important question. To some extent, we control the information in the electronic health record. We control the order sets. And so if you're seeing information that you feel is out of date, not at the evidence level, you should reach out to me or the CMIOs, the chief medical information officers in any of the institutions, and we would want to address that. I think going forward, where a cool innovation opportunity, and I don't think we've fully achieved this yet, but oftentimes there's equipoise. Right, it's not clear what where the solution is. Right, there may be some evidence, but not everybody may agree that that's the path. And I think we still have some work to do to figure out how to handle those use cases, and maybe allow one institution, particularly again where there's still some equipoise, allow an institution to try one method, look at the outcomes, and then truly act as a learning health system. Look at that data, and if that is indeed the preferred approach, spread that across the organization.
Any other questions? All right, just moving on here. We talk a lot about how great our environment is. Certainly the system is in terms of supporting entrepreneurs and innovators in healthcare IT. in particular, with ECare, there's always grumblings, as you know, it's never perfect. But if you guys had to say, what are the things that could be improved? What would you wish ECare Epic could look like? If you can name one or two things, what would they be, or at least what you've heard from at least your clinicians? What can be improved? Adam, you want to go first on this one? Because it sounds like you get the brunt of a lot of these. All right. And Jim, I'm sure you do too.
That's a tough one. Jim's point was well taken. I think we need to find a way to. There's huge value to having an enterprise instance of Epic with standardization. I think we need to create a governance structure that allows us to innovate and try new things and pilot within Epic, because as I said, it's all under our control. We can do these things to be able to test and then be able to regroup and disseminate across the system the changes that are successful. And so it's a governance decision on that side.
Mine are at the atomic level. Less clicks is definitely something that we strive for in terms of usability. The other thing are things like being able to externalize clinical decision support so that, in fact, innovators can build what I would call clinical decision support engine that can be inserted into the workflow or into an order set, and it's not on a passive basis, but on an active real-time basis. And we've started to do some experimentation in that space, but really solidifying that strategy.
Can you dive into that a little bit more, Jim? So today, if you have a clinician out there and she had her own clinical decision support application or sort of rules, how would she approach getting that into ECare? What's the process? What's the procedures and protocols?
Well, today, basically, you have to reinstantiate it into Epic, and therefore you can take the clinical decision support rule and through the demand management process, have it reviewed in terms of the efficacy of it, the clinical content committees, and eventually it's going to make its way into Epic, hopefully. What I'm really talking about, and maybe it's that constantly changing landscape, is I can see where there may be a product that we either develop or a vendor develops, clinical decision support almost as real-time based on evidence-based medicine, and we're able to inject that in quickly rather than having to go through what I would call the Epic builders, which is a laborious process.
Can I just expand? I mean, I think Jim's notation of usability is a core issue, and I know anybody here in the audience who's using Epic or frankly any EHR, it finds this challenging. What I would argue is hopefully there's an opportunity to truly transform the EHR and think of it differently than we're thinking about it today. So can we think of using voice assistants? We already use Nuance's Dragon product. Many of us use it to dictate, but you can also use it for simple commands. Now imagine a next generation where you can literally have a conversation with the computer and say, please order a CT scan for the patient. And then the computer might say back to you what type of CT or what's the indication that you would like, and sort of walk you through and be a virtual assistant. And at some point, could we potentially completely eliminate the traditional EHR? Could you video record a clinical encounter and then use technology to index automatically that video recording and then just write a very quick note about that? So, I mean, I think over time, as hopefully federal policy changes on reimbursement, hopefully we can start thinking completely differently about how we document.
Instead of thinking of Epic as being, our application or our EHR, which would imply that everything you do has to interact with that as a product, is really to think of it as infrastructure. When you think about the utilities in your house, your electrical wiring, it doesn't demand that you pick any particular appliance. You can plug whatever appliance you want in there, and you're going to get 110 volts out, right? So similarly, I think what we need to do is really start thinking about Epic as it matures as an infrastructure for where we can plug in those transformative products and applications that really do change the user experience. So the user could be the patient, the user could be the clinician, the user could be, the resident. But the key is that it is really a platform and a piece of infrastructure, not the endpoint that the user always has to be touching. But to the degree the user touches it, less clicks is better.
kind of a pause here. Question? Yep.
It's been a really nice overview, I think, of a complicated subject, how to innovate for the partner system. I wonder, for all the talking points that have been brought up, if you could address how many of them then are sort of then customized for the partners' implementation of Epic, and how many of these things, one of the nice things about software on your iPhone is then you've done it once, it can disseminate to everybody who has an iPhone. How many of these opportunities that we've talked about can then be readily scaled, and how many times do you basically have to re-implement the input-output relationship for every installation?
So there's two answers. One, within the Epic ecosystem, they actually have something called the Apple Orchard, that you can develop innovative applications. You can actually sell them, but it is specific to the Epic community, although the Epic community is fairly large. Then, really, if you use most of these open APIs, or if you use things like Fire standards, that's readily portable, not just to Epic, but to a Cerner or to other products. It's more of a loose coupling, so you can't get a real. So if you're doing an innovation that requires a tight coupling, you're probably going to end up marrying it to a particular vendor, and then going to have to retool it for other vendors to take advantage of that. But if you can do it with a loose coupling like Fire standards, it's readily deployable across many EHRs.
Well, just shifting gears here away from ECare and Epic. The next discussion point, we're going to talk about sort of independent innovations outside of ECare. So a lot of the work that the researchers and our clinical community focus on really pain points that don't necessarily have to dock back into ECare. And at least in the world that I work in with these gentlemen, a lot of the work really relies on sort of two things: either independent development that is within our system, meaning we develop our own applications and platforms, and more, at least over the last many years, the trend is really to partner up with industry and industry collaborators. So as we jump into this topic, maybe just to level set, let's start with you, Henry. Your experiences over the years in terms of developing a lot of the solutions for the MGH community and the departments within the LCS yourself. But as you think about collaborations with industry, what are the trade-offs, and how do you view making those decisions? And I assume a lot of it depends on resources and funding, but given sort of the optimal state, how would you, what's your perspective on that?
Sure. I think, we really sit in an amazing environment where, because we're in this clinical environment and we have this IT infrastructure, that we really are liberated to try new things. And the great thing about it is in my work, in my lab's work, we've always been very, very close to the clinicians and the patients, so that you can really, instead of a lot of IT solutions get invented in a vacuum, and then when they go out and try to place it with users are like, what is that, right? And so we've had the advantage of, for example, when we were building our first EHR, I had to use it in my own clinic, and sometimes when I was at the lab, we'd invent something, I'd say, this is the way we should do it, and then I'd get to clinic, and I'd be like, wow, this is awful, like, what was I thinking? Because the hat you wear when you're a clinician is very different than the hat you wear when you're developing technology. So I think my point there is just that take advantage of that rich environment, because it really is available for prototyping and rapid development and trying things, and honestly being able to fail quickly, right? I can't emphasize that enough, that we have an environment where you can fail quickly and move on to the next thing and find the thing that really works. In terms of working within that environment and then trying to commercialize products and services, really the world is your oyster. I mean, there are a lot of companies that either want to co-develop, there are companies who may want to license what you've already developed, and there may be companies who come to you with a product and you need to finish it out, either by doing effectively a clinical trial or that kind of thing. And I think it really depends on what you're looking to do. I mean, so if you have an invention or an idea that you're really, really passionate about, then by all means, find a way to develop it internally to the point where you can then get a partner from outside. I would say that it's really, really hard, virtually impossible to commercialize anything without a partner, unless you want to leave your day job. And most clinicians don't want to do that, right? So it's very hard to develop something, get to the point where you say, I want to change the world with it, and not leave your day job to do that. The only way to do that is to find a good partner. So that's something to keep in mind. But nevertheless, I think that there are a lot of different options, and that's what I would emphasize, is that in my lab, we've taken virtually every option. We've done co-development, we've done just knowledge licensing, we've done product licensing, we've done hosting of services that people use over the internet. Recently, we have a product that's called DXplain, which is a diagnostic decision support engine, and we hosted that up on Amazon Lambda, and that's a serverless environment where now companies can subscribe and use that to actually drive their products in different ways. So really, it's all the opportunities are there.
That's a great perspective. And Adam, this is a topic that's near and dear to you. And I know that through iHub and the work that you do across the Brigham, you certainly have a wonderful perspective on collaborations and certainly a large portfolio of companies and industry partners who are coming to you across a whole variety of categories. You want to maybe give us a view of that?
Sure. And just building on Henry's comments, I would describe us as the ability to be the hacker hospital of choice. And I mean hacker in the white sense of hacker. We really want to attract the brilliant minds out there that are trying to reinvent healthcare, and we want them to come to us to test out their solutions. And we have the ability, as Henry was describing, to test those solutions in real-world clinical environments. But even more importantly, we have the ability for our brilliant world-class researchers and clinicians to evaluate those applications. One thing that is missing in digital health is evidence. And so we have the ability to actually do robust trials to understand the benefits of those solutions and also the unintended consequences. And so the Brigham Innovation Hub, the Mass General M Lab and Healthcare Transformation Lab, and I want to point at Josie, Elias, and Chen Keo are here today from the iHub. They really are our interface between the incredible number of startups and established companies that are trying to enter this space and trying to connect those products with Brigham leadership, Brigham clinicians, researchers, and then make the difficult decisions of the couple of products that we can actually try and evaluate.
And Jim, as entrepreneurs and innovators at the entity levels, and certainly working with Henry and Adam and iHub and MLab and others, as great solutions emerge, what's your viewpoint on how do you sort of keep your fingers on the pulse to make sure that solutions that actually solve real problems for the system and certainly can be scaled, how do you view sort of touching those and validating that, and then more importantly, making decisions at a central level in some ways to bring it into the enterprise?
So we've talked about that and actually have brought together sort of the iHub folks and the MLab folks in terms of, how do we look at innovations? Because if you can't scale an innovation, in other words, I think the sites can be incubators, but then to scale it usually requires some additional horsepower. So we want a governance structure that can really evaluate that. I'm also going to go back to your original question. So Adam and Henry have given examples, but I think a couple other examples. The Mass General Brigham Women's Clinical Data Science Center. Look at the joint with NVIDIA and with GE on that. With Health Catalyst, we're helping them put together a population health program that then they can go out and sell. So it isn't necessarily always selling a product. Sometimes it's co-developing, getting a royalty and a revenue stream back in. So there's lots of ways to do it, where things like Gene Insight was an outright sale. Things like Cupid was an outright sell. So there's a lot of ways to monetize things, and probably Trung could answer it better than I can, but I just wanted to make folks aware of that.
That was a great commercial for us, Jim. We're going to get you a BD business card. So any questions from the audience before? Yep, Mark?
So when you guys are thinking about opportunities, ideas that come to you, from the audience perspective, you're oftentimes thinking about this: is this a product or is this a feature? I'm kind of interested to see how you guys think about this when ideas come to you. do you have a rubric where you say that's kind of a product or that's kind of a feature? Because it's kind of an important first decision for both the innovators in the audience as well as for you in terms of which sort of path you go on.
So I might answer that, and actually there's an important question we ask even before that question, which is it a priority for us? I mean, right now we are just every day, and Chen could probably give the exact numbers, but 10, 20 companies reach out to you every day, new companies with new ideas. And so the first step in that process is figuring out, is it a priority for the organization? Because if it's not a priority, then we don't want to waste our precious resources on it. And then if it is a priority, then we start to do an evaluation and actually test it with the leaders in that area to see if it sort of holds up, if it's going to be valuable. And to be honest, sometimes the very early stage companies are features, and that, to our extent, gives us the opportunity to potentially co-develop with them. If we think there's something there, if we think there's a talented team, if we think they're onto something, we can help coach them to translate that feature into a product. So I think it's really case by case that we would look at it and see, is it meeting a critical need? Is it adding value to our organization? What's the team that we'd be working with? And then evaluate the individual opportunity.
We have to be careful because usually what they want is a press release that says partners as co-developer. So we're involved with a company, a startup that's working on a cybersecurity application. Where we ended up in the end is we said, we'll contract with you for 8 months because we don't want a press release. In fact, reputationally, we're not sure we want to be associated with this product, and then we'll see where it goes after those 6 to 8 months.
Thanks for the update on that project, Jim.
I think that's a really good question in terms of feature product. And what I would say is that the way we think about it conceptually is that if it's something that fits into an existing user experience, whether it's patient or clinician, then we think of that as a feature because it's something that you're not going to transform their experience. You're just going to add something to it, maybe improve it a little bit incrementally. But if it's something which really changes the way they experience the, whatever it is, a health system, access, whatever, then it probably rises to the level of being a product because products really change people's experience. And that's kind of a rubric that we use.
I got the 1 minute sign, but we can take one more question.
In terms, I was just wondering, in terms of the resources available from clinicians and partners, do we have an idea and kind of like a prototype? And we want to approach different companies. Sometimes for a big company, it's not very easy to actually get through. So what kind of resources are available for us to help us contact those companies? Because sometimes starting with the rep for Brigham, they may not be able to actually evaluate our contribution, and they may not even refer us to the right person in the company.
So, and because I'm seeing you're wearing a Brigham lanyard, so at the Brigham, you can reach out to the Brigham Innovation Hub. Actually, if you go to the main website, bwhihub.org, there's a form for internal staff members. You can put in your information, and that can be a first step. In fact, and we work very closely with Partners Innovation. We actually would prefer you don't reach out to industry until you've had a first consultation internally. We may need to do some things to ensure we protect your copyright. We will encourage you potentially to fill out an innovation disclosure online, and we may help coach you and provide some additional resources to you to help advance your idea. And then we have between our team, the information systems team, Partners Innovation, we have a large network of resources and can help targeted outreach once we better understand your ideas. And there are similar resources available on the MGH side as well.
Thank you. And maybe I know we're running out of time, so I first want to thank the audience for your time here. Hopefully that was enjoyable, certainly, hopefully informative, helpful. And then just certainly thank the panelists here, good friends and certainly people that I've worked with over many years, and it's been fun to do this with you guys, all right? So thank you very much. Can you put your hands together, please? Thanks.
And many thanks to the panel and Trung for that brilliant tour of the top strata of our digital environment here at Partners. The vision and the opportunities, they're shaping all of our collected futures. And I also want to note, increasingly for our office, also what we see as the potential to benefit the delivery of care around the world through the integration with Partners Healthcare International. And Trung is also driving that, and I want to acknowledge Dr. Lauren Williams from the PHI team who's here tonight. Shifting now to our second panel, one of the beautiful aspects of the partners community is the way that people who could work literally anywhere in the industry find fulfillment and enjoyment working inside of our system. And in my mind, Sandy Aronson is a wonderful prototype of that exact insight. He came to PHS after decades of high-profile service in the biotech and consulting worlds. His title is Executive Director of IT at Partners Personalized Medicine. His educational background could not be more perfectly matched for his mandate. Degrees in computer science and organizational behavior from Stanford, and a degree in biology from Harvard. So Sandy's going to moderate this second panel, focusing on individual issues relative to the commercialization of health IT.
So we really do have an awesome group of panelists today. So Kim is an allergist, immunologist at Mass General, and runs the quality and safety, serves as the quality of safety officer at Mass General for allergies. But the thing that really will enable her to make a lot of comments, a lot of useful comments here, is the fact that she has built an IT capability that enables clinicians to assess allergies that have been recorded, drug allergies, and evaluate them so that they can decide what is the most appropriate course in terms of medication selection to making sure that we minimize the likelihood of adverse events. The thing that's really special about this is it both it both improves care and also reduces costs, which is like kind of the holy grail of innovation, and what that leads to is a lot of folks wanting their innovation. So she's experiencing that now. She's in the trenches and can provide us with perspective surrounding that. Kamal Jethwani is the Senior Director of Connected Health Innovation, and he really has this unique perspective because he gets to see all of the connected health ideas that come from the partners investigators, from the hospital investigators, and gets to really evaluate, sort of what is likely to work and what is not likely to work. So he has the perspective of over time seeing what the flow of innovation is and how that actually plays out. And Mark Mikulski he comes to us with a really significant background in entrepreneurship. He has been involved in growing multiple companies, and now he directs the MGH BWH Clinical Data Sciences Center, and is really focused on enabling partners to deploy to deploy machine learning capabilities in a way that will enable us to really develop that expertise in that area and then commercialize it. And as part of that, he's been involved in establishing these commercial relationships that have brought an enormous amount of resources to partners to enable us to really pursue those things. So what Kim, Kamal, and Mark and I really want to do today is really share our perspective on what's involved in working with partners innovation for the purpose of engaging industry, either to fund a research project, fund work that you're doing, or monetize innovations that you've already created, or really, as folks spoke about in the last panel, distribute capabilities that you've created. I personally had the opportunity to work with Partners Innovation and its successors for about 14 years now, and they have consistently delivered deals for us that have given us the resources that we needed to dramatically expand the development capabilities that we have, the the impact that we can have on care, and giving us the ability to distribute our work. It's been an absolutely amazing experience for myself and my team, but at the same time, there are major challenges and trade-offs and stress that can come with pursuing this path. So what we really want to do is share some of that today to enable everyone here to, maybe have that perspective as they decide what path is optimal for them, as for you, as you make decisions about what path you want to take as you develop ideas that may be commercializable. So Kim, maybe we can start with you. And if I could ask you two questions. So the first is just, you've come so far in terms of hitting these really major milestones in the path to commercialization, and sort of, what have you learned through that process? And also, kind of more specifically, what are the key things that you found? What are the things that were really key to those successes?
Am I on? Okay, there you go. Well, thank you. So I'd say first, if you're a clinician and you have an idea or an innovation that you think is worthwhile and you really believe in it, that gets you so far and motivated you to come here, and it might be a great idea, but actually you're going to have to prove it. Ideas are cheap. Many people have told me that over the years. And I think that you have to make sacrifices in your clinical work or in your research, or double dip on your time, triple book yourself to be able to do something and to get to a place where you've proven that it's not just an idea, it's a product and it has clinical value. And that's a sacrifice not everybody is willing to make. But that's, I think, how you get there. Another aspect is that even though we're really fortunate to be in this really rich place with many different layers of innovation and support, it's so confusing. I'm just learning about new places that exist within our community where I could have sought advice and support. And I think that we could really benefit from some sort of flow chart where I'm at Mass General and I worked, I've had support of the Medical Innovation Program and the Healthcare Transformation Lab. And then I've met with the people at Brigham iHub because this innovation was partners wide and came to Brigham first. And then within innovations, it just can get really confusing who's there to support people who have an idea or a product, and who to go to first, and how to navigate. So I think that reaching the milestone of potentially having a commercial product was only because of my desire not to quit. And I have been told no by iHub before. I have been told no by the Medical Innovation Program and the Healthcare Transformation Lab before. They ultimately ended up giving me some money and support and project management support. But at the same time, I think that it's not the easiest thing, and you have to just really be scrappy. And you can pitch innovations in many different ways. So I've written for quality and safety grants. I've written for innovation grants. I've written for more technology grants, like to try to make what you're doing sound correct to the person in front of you. And right now, it's a commercial product that's going to improve quality and reduce costs. But maybe yesterday, it was a safety tool that could be built into Epic. And so what you're doing and the innovation you create can be different things depending on who's in front of you. And learning to spin that is kind of really key to keep going. I think that those are the major, my major take-homes.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things that I feel is almost a rule of innovating at partners is you have to view a no as, you have to translate that into not yet. Come back a little while, a little bit in the future. And by the way, if anyone has a question or comment, feel free to raise your hand, and we'd love to involve you. So Kamal, so you know, given where you sit, you see a lot of folks kind of trying to make this transition from the academic world into the commercial space. And what's your experience as folks try to do that? What do you notice as difficulties or things that translate easily?
I think I'm on. Great. Thank you. Thank you for the question. So first of all, Kim, every time I had a cent, every time someone said, I've never heard about connected health, I would be a millionaire right now. And there are other people who say the same thing about all the other innovation groups within partners. So you're not alone. I've heard that before. And that's really one of my first takeaways is it is so hard for someone with a good idea to know where to go, even in a system that literally has 6 innovation groups within a 2-mile radius. So one of our biggest learnings has been how can we get out there more in front of people so that they learn about us, they hear about what we can help them with. So that's lesson number 1 for me. The second thing, I think, getting more to your question now, everyone who comes from within the partner system within innovation are primarily people who are clinicians or researchers who have a drive to solve a problem that they're facing in their day-to-day clinical work, and they finally think that they have fixed it or they found a solution, but really they have found that solution through the process of either doing some research, getting a grant from somewhere, or through their clinical practice. They don't come as much with a product mindset. So a lot of times when they come to us, our first step is actually helping them unlearn what they have learned as a researcher, as a clinician, and try to put them in a product mentality, which can be really, really hard. So for example, you got a grant to do QSV work, right? And the grant expects you to sort of show, patient safety values, but really, guess what? No one in the venture firm cares about patient safety values. They care about where the dollars are. And so really being well, this needs to be an app. It can't sit on Epic because otherwise it won't work on Cerner, and that's what you really have to worry about when you're going out and raising funding. So those kinds of changes are sometimes really hard for some people to make. And so a lot of our job is just sort of bringing them in and helping them understand that when we're asking you to pivot, it doesn't mean that we're telling you your idea is bad. We're putting you in the mindset of a startup, which is pivot or perish. And that's not the research way, definitely not the academic medicine way. And that's really interesting. And people who are able to transcend that and make that change do really well. The one last point I'll make, the other thing we see a lot is also the understanding of doing research for academic publications and promotions versus doing research to get a product into the market. 2 totally different animals, and a lot of times that's another thing that we try to talk people into. You could do a 5 to 10 patient usability pilot to get this to the next round of milestones where you don't have to do a randomized clinical trial that's going to take 3 years, because guess what? Your technology won't be relevant in 3 years. So let's figure out what you need, what's your minimum viable product for your minimum viable research to get you to your next milestone, and let's identify milestones based on commercialization versus what's going to get you your Harvard promotion. And those mindsets are very different and interesting to see how people sort of struggle through that. But when they get there, that's what makes a successful inventor, I think.
Yeah, so as you're going through that process with folks, and you're really helping them both understand how they need to make the transition and evaluating the idea.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like you can, after seeing so many of these, do you feel like you can predict which ones are most likely to succeed? You feel like there's a set of characteristics that these ideas need to have in order for them to reach their potential?
Yeah, I almost never ever worry about the idea that they come in with. I almost always worry about the need they're solving. If they've picked the right need and the right stakeholder, we almost always can get the idea to work, and we can through the right process get them to the right idea. Oftentimes, I think the ones that aren't usually successful or aren't really solving a real need or aren't really solving a need that is being felt by enough number of people. The other problem with healthcare is, there are some use cases that are broad, which is take diabetes, for example. You're never going to, you're boiling an ocean out there, right? So you're never going to solve the life of every single person with diabetes within the partner system. That will be too much work, too much time. And so you need to figure out, what niche to pick and how to work on that. Versus other cases that are more narrow and deep. And in those cases, like for example, epilepsy, you need to be able to solve the problem vertically enough to be able to make it meaningful. And so those are some of the things that we worry a little bit about. So on the idea front, I'm more concerned about, are you solving a real need for a real stakeholder? And if you're doing that, it doesn't matter if you came in with the idea of an app, we can figure out what the idea is with you, what it needs to be and how it needs to be integrated if the need is real. So that's my evaluation, I think, on the idea side. And as you said, ideas change every day. You're pivoting constantly to finally be like, is this sticking? On the other side is the person, the investigator. And I think you brought up a really good point. Are you persistent enough? If you've written 6 NIH grants and had rejections and you think that that's persistence, trust me, you're in for a whole other ball game here with a whole other set of stakeholders who love to say no. So, persistence, your personality, what you're willing to bring to the table. If you are a physician who's been practicing for 20 years and you expect to be CEO of a company, not happening, right? So those are some of the characteristics where we really, that help people succeed, based on, if you're really looking to solve a problem and you're really in it for the need that you're solving, you'll be successful.
Mark, from your perspective, where you said you must get lots of people coming to you, kind of asking you for advice of how they navigate this innovation process. How do they get started? How will they fit in? What will their role be? Could you speak to how you advise them? What do you tell folks?
Yeah, sure. So I'm lucky that I sit in this this pretty interesting emerging field of artificial intelligence, or machine learning, and deep learning. And one of the things about deep learning is, I think a lot of people think that it's kind of like pixie dust. You just sort of like sprinkle it over the top of your problem, and that it makes the problem go away. So we sort of get a lot of incoming traffic that way. And what I'd say, your answer, Kamal, I mean, your answers were your answer was so great. I mean, it's like, it's kind of the person, and if you've identified the right need, because that's ultimately allows you to get those are really fundamentally, artificial intelligence or machine learning is actually just a, kind of like piece of a product that you're trying to sell, right? So it's like a piece of something that's that you're trying to sell into the market, or a piece of something that's going to ultimately solve a need. So I think you articulated it really well. And so how do you bring this to the innovation world? Well, it's I think it does take a little bit of flexing if you come at it from the clinical world. On one hand, you really know the need. You probably really know the need. Sometimes you know the need so intimately in a way that almost no one else in the world maybe knows it as well as you. But there's also these other things, like how are you going to operationalize it? Who are you going to sell it into? That question about is it a product or is it a feature? That's a real common, people think it's a product, but it's actually a feature sort of thing. I mean, and those are just things that, I'm a radiologist. I wasn't trained to think like that. So that's why these innovation groups are around. It's to teach you those things and to get you off the ground, sort of like open up the spectrum, open up the world a little bit. Say, okay, it's a great idea. The market size is this, though, and for you to actually build this fantastic product will cost you this much, and this is how hard it will get to be to get off the ground. And so that's part of this evolution process that I think that we've been talking about, which is it takes a lot of tenacity to go from that like proto idea to something that works within the market. And the only way to your guides through this are folks like the innovations team. They're just really phenomenal at that.
So when we were preparing for this panel, there's one question that we feel a lot of a lot of people have when they start this innovation process, which is you've got an idea. When you first have an idea, you haven't committed it to paper, you haven't shared it with anyone yet. You have to decide what you're going to do, how you're going to proceed with that idea. And one of the things that you have to decide is, are you going to share it with the institution? Are you going to share it with us and start the process of, moving that through? And I just want to ask the panel, maybe we can start with you, Mark, for thoughts on that, how to think about that.
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that because I think it's one of those things that you kind of like, oftentimes I get this question sort of like in a hushed tone. It's like, should I share this or should I just keep it to myself? And I think, it really is all about the execution. Ideas are cheap, right? The execution is really hard oftentimes for anything of great value because, if if that barrier to entry wasn't there, then it'd already be out there, right? Either that, and then you have a ton of competitors in the market. So I guess you can sort of balance the uniqueness of that idea against the likelihood of being able to commercialize and sort of get that all off the ground yourself, sort of take it outside the world of partners or whatever institution you're associated with. And I guess I'm just I think in my world, at least, and at least within healthcare information technology, the speed is so fast. I mean, the iterations are so fast, like mobile is super fast, connected health is super fast, right? So you don't really have the time to try to build all the system all yourself. And do you really want to encumber yourself with the patent costs? And, all of a sudden you realize how much more time it takes to just, So I would just, my sense is that, and the other part of this is, I'll just speak very candidly. Most of the time, the value, not always, but again, sort of speaking from the healthcare information technology space, the real value is locked up in the company, not necessarily in the licensing terms. So if you think this is a really valuable idea and product, you don't really get all that value unless you jump off and get preferred stock options in the startup, right? So, that's those are the kinds of things you learn by hanging out with these guys at Innovations. So that's my bias.
Kim, come on.
So I think as far as telling people your ideas, so about like 4 years ago, I was told that this was not patentable or really protectable, really. And in health IT, it's first to market. And then I went and shopped and met all these people that told me no. And so then I'm like, well, how am I going to be first, right? Like, how does that happen? How do I be the first one to do this if no one will do this with me? So I think that that's a really hard thing. So if you're told you don't really have something patentable, which with health information technology isn't, it was a lot of allergist know-how, I was told, and maybe a copyright, yes. So we have copyright and allergist know-how. So how is that a commercial product now? So it's really a hard process, and you kind of don't know necessarily that after all of this, it will be the product in this space. Hopefully it is. I think I still am first leading. And then the other part of this is this whole idea of starting a company or just saying, yes, I'll take this help finally from everybody here. And I still think that there are aspects of, it's much easier just to go about my business and be a clinician and a researcher and let everybody else worry about the fine print. But then that does mean that that I don't have a company that has the license, and that also if other people want me to help them to do something similar, or that's all private then consulting rather than having this company that you've built around your product. But you really need to have done more numbers and spent more time even than I've committed to really know that you should be starting a company with your product, I think.
To me, I'm not an expert, and Partners Innovation certainly is, and you should go meet Trung and Troy and the others. But to me, it's like that's that's not really a question because partners already owns your firstborn and everything else. So you don't lose anything by telling them. You may or may not gain anything, but you don't lose anything. That's kind of my bias. So if someone asks me, should I tell them? Like, they already know probably, but you should tell them. So yeah, now the question is, will you gain anything? Depends on who you talk to, and depends on your idea, depends on what stage you are at, depends on, is that an organizational priority? There's a lot of ifs in that. But you don't lose anything. And then the second thing I'll say is, don't think about commercialization, or at least I tell people, don't think about commercialization as I need this to be a startup company. It could be a startup company, but it could be a licensed product. It could be a component of another startup company. It could be something that you actually co-develop with someone else because you have a nice little concept, but someone else comes and adds a different kind of value to it, and you co-develop it with a Fortune 500 company. Someone else creates a startup based on your idea and then takes a license from partners. There's 25 different options besides even the ones we're talking about here. So, and with our clinical training, unfortunately, they don't teach us this at med school. I wish they did. So we don't know the answers, and so you really, go to Partners Innovation and figure out what those options are. Protecting it is interesting. Again, as you said, in health IT, there's not really that much you can do to protect it unless you have a unique algorithm. And so, again, I would say step one, definitely disclose. You don't lose anything. They probably know. Step number two, figure out all the plethora of options of how do you commercialize it. And some might be easier, if you just want to license it out and, count your dollars, that's a pretty easy way to do it. Or again, get triple booked and start up a startup company. And then the third thing is, how do you get from point A to point B? And this is where a lot of people sort of figure that out, and they're like, all right, I'm done, I don't want to do it. And by that, what I mean is, you are here with an idea and potentially a small prototype. How do you get it to a point where it's interesting for someone to license it from you? And that might include clinical validation. That might include creating an actual product. That might include, developing something as a software that you've actually, either tried out or something else. And then also disseminate it. One of the best ways to find customers is to go out and talk about your work. Go to conferences, present your idea, present your findings, publish, write blogs, whatever that is. So I would say, like, there's getting from point A to point B, there's several work streams that you need to follow. And so figure out if you're ready to commit to that and what those steps are, and then what's the financial input for that. So disclosing won't help you with everything, but it's a good first step.
Maybe we should turn to the audience, see if there are any questions out there for our panelists. So I'll take the prerogative to ask the next one. So what do you think what makes you most excited about technologies you see, coming down the pike? What do you think is really going to hit? What do you think is overhyped?
Machine learning guy, I want to say. Machine learning is definitely not overhyped. No, oh, blockchain. No. Blockchain's in total substance. It's so really, with all of these technologies, that there's some element of hype, and the real question is how much is there, and really, where is it in the hype cycle curve? Where does the trough of disillusionment come up? So all those things being said, I have to say that I'm pretty excited about machine learning and some of the opportunities that are presenting themselves in our space and in healthcare. I think I'm excited about it, not necessarily because it's just a cool technology, which it is, but it's forced us to relook at old technologies in a new way. So I'll give you an example from my world. In radiology, we've had computer-aided detection for a long time. We've had it in mammography for a long time, and it just works terribly. It's really bad. But and so for a long time, people just sort of looked at it as like one of those things where there's a lot of hype and then it failed. And now we get to look at this technology that a lot of people have just, not wanted to touch for a while, and it's brand new because we've got AI or machine learning, right? And we can look at it brand new. All these things that weren't so sexy 2 years ago all of a sudden are super sexy, like visualization solutions are all of a sudden really interesting. So it's not really, it's sort of like some of these things which needed to get refreshed for a long time now have a new lease on life, and I can bring in great talent to solve these problems that they wouldn't have gotten it like within 50 meters before, because it just was not interesting. Now we can use that as a way of making some of these things, these real concrete problems, interesting enough that we have great talent to look at it.
I'm interested in, if you take aside, how effective the technology would be, just like thinking about the notion of hype itself and how much, like how you should consider that in the context of innovation, like using it for funding versus, trying to not be sucked into it too much. What are your thoughts on that?
So the good thing about hype is also that if the hype persists enough, NIH will fund some of that, right? And so use the keywords correctly in your grant applications, and that'll give you success. But having said that, I think in my 8 years of doing digital, I have seen a lot of sort of hype cycles around. We thought Fitbit was going to change the world. It changes the world for 3 months, and then everyone forgets about him. And so there have been some of those things, and what's coming out, what's emerging to us as a science in digital health that's really worth paying attention to is adoption, sciences around adoption, science around engagement, and science around workflow implementation. And those are really interesting to us because interesting sensors are going to come out every single day. And literally, we just looked at Twitter, an analysis yesterday, and there's been one new sensor at least per day that's come out in the last 2 years, every single day. And a lot of them are going to die a natural death, but a lot of them are really interesting in clinical applications. And some of these sensor manufacturers don't even know that. They can't connect the dots between, their heart rate variability sensor and some of the really interesting clinical cases that we can connect it to. And so what we are looking for is, how do you take some of these interesting signals and way to collect data and then merge them into clinical use cases? And then the other thing I'm excited about, which I'll take you a little bit up on, is the combination of really interesting data sensing, which is now allowing us to get 24/7 data from patients with artificial intelligence to create interesting biomarkers. So one experiment that I'm running right now is we're looking at using physical activity, so Fitbit sensors, to predict COPD exacerbations. And we've created a model that with 84% accuracy can tell me if a person's going to get a COPD exacerbation within a week just by looking at changes in physical activity. So imagine if we're able to prove this out, we just give every patient a $50 Fitbit. And this is the most powerful and most cost-effective biomarker that has ever come out. So those are the kinds of things that we're really excited about. How do you use this interesting sensing technology with intelligence to really transform how we're predicting and how we're taking care of our patients?
Kim, I'm really interested in, so you've got this invention and it solves a clinical problem, it solves an economic problem, and you're going out talking to companies, working to get them to commercialize it. How much do you find that carries the day? Like that's the end goal, right? It should carry the day. But how much do you find that carries the day versus you have to link it to some form of hype in order to make it happen?
So I think, this particular app that I've created is in the space of antibiotic stewardship, which happens to be something that's kind of hyped, but not maybe from the business perspective. It's hyped in hospitals. It's hyped in the United States. We're trying to be good stewards of antibiotics and healthcare, associated infections and superbugs. The public doesn't want any of those. So in a way, it's in a good space for interest. And so I definitely have benefited from that, but I actually had to convey that to the potential buyers. That wasn't something that they knew. That's something the leaders of this hospital know. That's something the leaders of quality and safety at our hospitals know. It's something the infectious disease doctors know, but it wasn't really something that was on the radar of companies making health IT solutions. And even actually the first potential buyer last year was a in the allergy space. And so it wasn't an area that they had touched, how allergies impact stewardship. So I think that that's really an important, it was important for me to create hype, I guess. I was my own cheerleader about the space and providing data and CDC blasts about why this is important. And then I think that after their periods of due diligence, they agreed. For me, I think we're almost to the point where somebody is making this, is going to make this for people, and then my real win is when we get it back here at Partners in its right form. I've been trying to create a smart app that would work within Partners now for many years, and it will happen, and it won't be me running it. And so we are going to be the first people to get this, and I think until it is back here and has a nicer user experience than what I was able to afford, it's not going to be a win for me. And also, we do have about a list of about 20 hospitals that are on the already buyers of this, or takers or users, including most prestigious academic medical centers in this country. So I think that when it's in the hands of those people and us, then I've really won. Although it'd be nice to pay for college and stuff too for my kids, but the real win will be usability.
So I have a question. So you decide to start a company, but at the same time you decide to keep your job at Brigham, so Partners. So how do you manage the conflict of interest? Not only the formal procedure, but in your life, because you have to act within certain roles, and you cannot spend a lot of time. So can you share your experiences?
And maybe we can break that question into two pieces. So a scenario where there's a technology that's being licensed out and you're trying to optimize how you work with that company that's licensing it. And a second scenario where there's there's a company being started up and there's a desire for your time in that company. So
But you're a co-founder of the company.
or you're a co-founder of the
Like
company.
the app, the allergy app. So how do you manage the conflict of interest from the point of view of Partners, also from the point of view of the company, because everybody wants bits of you, right? And how do you stay in the balance?
So I can tell you, I've been really lucky up to this point because I haven't made $1 yet.
But still, it's not.
And I didn't form a company. But so in this, I'm going to have this problem moving forward, right? So I still do research on the app within Partners. I still operationally run the programs within Partners. And then if this is licensed, then you're right, then I will have conflict of interest. So as soon as I sign on the dotted line, maybe next week, I will have to manage conflict. And I think that we have also resources for managing conflict of interest. So I've had a couple of conversations with, I'm going to cut ties from the research aspect that's my plan, of evaluation of the app when it's made professionally. I'll let other people adopt it, do research on it if they want. I would like to see the data, like for quality assurance purposes and updates and things like that. But I'm no longer going to have a publication conflict of interest. And then as far as operationally, I always thought this was the right thing to do, so I'm not conflicted. Before it was even a health information technology, and it was actually, a pocket card algorithm that we defined. I thought this was the right thing to do. So I think, in general, I just go with my ethics and my gut and my sense that if this becomes not the right thing to do, that I would say so.
Yeah, just a note on the way that Gene Insight worked, as Kamal has noted, there's a million ways to do these things. So the way that we did Gene Insight was we created a company, but the company was 100% owned by Partners. So we remained Partners employees and worked in the company's interest. So what that did is that alleviated us of any personal conflicts of interest, but we've always had to make a lot of disclosures related, even after that company was sold, relative to organizational conflicts of interest. So I think we're down to the end of our time. But just if I could ask just one last question of each of you. So if you had the chance to give somebody who's thinking about starting really looking at commercializing something, just one piece of advice, what would it be? What's the most important thing to like keep in mind?
All right. Apart from everything else I've said, we clinicians and researchers have a lot of blinders because of the way we're trained, right? We're trained to follow algorithm, we're trained to follow guidelines, and we sort of view the world this way. When you become a product person or a person who is now creating something to commercialize, you have to start thinking more horizontally. You have to start thinking about other stakeholders and other interests. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I've seen that helps people succeed is when those blinders go away and they're like, oh, that's what my patient wants, and I can't build this app only for the clinician, because if the patient doesn't use it, the clinician's not going to be engaged with it either. It's not going to create the value efficiencies I want it to. So as you start empathizing with the other stakeholders, especially the end users, you become a better product person and you become a better entrepreneur, I think. Saying that on behalf of the entrepreneur on the panel.
That the flip side of not knowing who to talk to for me was actually talking to everybody, and that there was value there in that everybody that I could think of, and I know we did have a conversation before, but we've never had a conversation. So everyone I found along the way, the more people who have heard of whatever you're creating, have heard of your innovation, heard of the technology, the better, because it might come up in a meeting with a business that they're talking to. They might have different business contexts. And ultimately, the two different licensing opportunities that I was presented with, one was found from a Mass General group, and the other was actually Trung and Sandy finding a partner. So it was actually just bouncing myself around and talking to everybody that ended up benefiting me. So it takes time away, and you don't know who is doing what, but just keep going and get everybody engaged.
I would just say, just do it. I think it's really hard. It takes a lot of energy. It might suck a couple of years out of your life, but my sense, at least, is that there are very few things out there that are as compelling and as interesting, as fulfilling as something that you made helping someone right in front of you. And we're so lucky in the healthcare enterprise that you get to help people at sometimes the worst parts of their life. And beyond just being able to provide healthcare, if you're actually making the healthcare system better by something that you made. Oh, so cool. So you should just do it. It's hard, but just do it.
Thank you all.
That was great. Thank you to each of the panelists. We hope you all will stick around, spend some time with the panelists at the reception. It'll be the most fruitful reception you have this whole holiday season. And it will belie the notion that a full head of hair is required to be an entrepreneur, but I can only help but observe that. So our next session is January 24th. It's the fourth in our 5 series. We'll be back at MGH. We hope you can all come. We'll be broadcasting to Brigham for folks who can't get over. The focus is going to be that commercial opportunity, how to cement it, how to drive it forward. So I hope everyone has a great holiday season. Please stick around, have a beverage, get to meet these entrepreneurs and the prior panel, and have a wonderful season. Thanks.